to The Insomniac Show with Nicolette and Brian. We'll get real deep with you, educating, inspiring, and solving problems with some of the most inspirational humans on the planet. Buckle up and come on the journey.
I'm excited. All right, guys, I'm Nicolette, and today Brian and I are here with Rose Clark. She is an authorized language of listening parenting coach, and she's going to talk to us today about parenting. Go figure, right? She's going to talk to us a little bit about that. So certainly it affects a lot of people, and I think there will be some good nuggets of wisdom in here today. So thank you for joining us, Rose. We really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
So why don't you kick us off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey to language of listening?
Sure. So I live in Nova Scotia, Canada. I'm married to my best friend, Steve, and we have 2 little girls. And, before we got married, I had a pretty good idea of what kind of a mom I wanted to be, or what kind of an experience I wanted my kids to have in their childhood. I did not have a fantastic experience in childhood. And so I really wanted my kids to have something different. And so, I had it worked out in my mind. I talked to my husband, Steve, about it when we were just engaged before we even got married, and I said, what I want is I want our kids to be able to have their own thoughts and feelings and opinions. Just let those things be theirs, And then I also wanted them to have a close emotional attachment with both their parents. And he was all for it. He thought that was fantastic. And, when we got married and early into our marriage, I burned out at work, unfortunately, and ended up on a therapist's couch. And she said to me, why are you pushing yourself so hard? How did you end up here burnt out? And I never really thought about why, and so what popped out of my mouth kind of surprised me. And I just said to her, well, I'm just trying to make sure I'm worth the space I take up in this world. That's what my little brain came up with. And so during that time, as we, continued to talk, she was able to reflect back to me that I had a pretty severely abusive childhood. I didn't know. You don't know when you're a kid. That's just life, and you just kind of accept it. Although I knew enough that I knew I wanted my children to have a different experience,
Right.
And while I was in therapy, during those months in therapy, I did become pregnant with my first child. Motherhood starts to bring out all the unexpressed anger and unshed tears. And that was okay. One kid was okay. But once the second one came along, pretty quick after, I had 2 under 2, and the yelling started, I knew that there was something really not okay, And I knew that I had the thoughts in my mind, but I didn't have the tools. And I didn't even know if the tools existed. I didn't know if the tools that I really felt like I wanted existed. And then one day I stumbled on this lady named Sandra Blackard and this parenting model called Language of Listening. And I was like, I think this is it. These are the tools. This is the kind of respect that I want to have for my kids, because it has this balance, this model of like really, affirming the child for who they are and still being the one in charge. I feel like a lot of parenting today is either we're super duper heavy duty, heavy handed, like really, really in charge, or we're trying to really acknowledge the child's emotions and be like really, kind and friendly to them. And we feel like the pendulum has to be on either.
Right.
Whereas language of listening falls smack in the middle, gives us the best of both worlds. We get to be the one in charge and hold boundaries. And the child feels more connected after we've held boundaries with them, and that emotional connection is there. And we affirm the goodness of the child. We're basically coaching the greatness in the child to rise to the surface.
Right. It's funny you say that, and that is something that I will bring up shortly, because that those two kind of extremes are really they definitely play out in my parenting style.
Right.
So
Yeah. Most of us go back and forth throughout the day.
But it only takes like 3 seconds to get from one end to the other,
true.
right?
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, so here's what I wanted to kind of start with. I really wanted to understand, what was it before? So you mentioned you didn't have the greatest childhood, right? Yeah, I didn't either, but how did that play a role in, how you approached parenting when you got started? When you got started parenting, I should say.
When I got started, how did that play a role? Yeah, well, I guess what happens is, when you're experiencing life, when you're in your childhood, especially, you're laying out, mental pathways are getting laid out, and so your responses to things, many of us, I think most people can say that, sometimes I hear the words my parents say, come out of my mouth. And although I was trying really hard to not have that happen, even just the yelling itself was something that I felt like, was a response. But it's also a response to trauma it's also a response to not valuing yourself and not knowing how to hold boundaries. And I think that's probably, again, I've already kind of talked about holding boundaries, but like I had no clue how to hold boundaries in a healthy way. I didn't even know boundaries could be healthy. Boundaries in my mind were mean and controlling. That's what and so I became a mean and controlling mom when I had to hold a boundary because I didn't know any other, my brain didn't know any other way. Those were just mental pathways. And so I think, being exposed to having boundaries held in a mean and controlling way when I was a child, those mental pathways were there. And so that's kind of how it was. When I had to hold a boundary, I would get angry. I would yell, that kind of an idea. So I think that's how it really affected things. And then the flip side of, I did want things to be different, but.
Right. Do you think it's because, like, how you said you fell right back into that sort of pattern? Do you think it's just because it's almost, I don't want to say it's instinctual because it's not instinctual, but it's so embedded in your brain that that's how things work, that just goes right there automatically, especially in times of stress?
Exactly. You hit the nail right on the head, Brian. That's exactly what it is. Those mental pathways are just there. They're just there. And it's like, what's the easiest highway for those thoughts to go down, right? Those reactions to go down. And so that's part of the work that I do with people. It's part of the work that I had to do myself, was to get some new mental pathways and have those mental pathways be the strongest ones. So that's where my mind goes in the midst of, you said it, those difficult high stress situations.
So how do you, okay, so I got a question. This is like a biological sort of question now, right? Because, we develop these mental pathways by thoughts and by things that happen to us. And, you associate, I always use this thing, like some people, you say dog, and some people see that brown furry dog, they were kids, or vicious teeth if they don't like dogs, or whatever the case is, right? There's these associations that automatically happen. How do you go about creating new mental pathways when you already have these ones that have been so ingrained in you from your childhood?
Yeah, really. And so the ones from our childhood, like in a lot of ways, we could call them adaptations. And so it's just a matter of having like a new adaptation, right? We're in a new situation. Like for me, I was very careful about the person I married because I did not want abuse to be a part of the family that I had now. And I didn't want my children to experience that. So I was very, very careful. I live in the safest family I know of right now. Very different from the family I grew up in, right? So I don't need those same adaptive behaviors. Those adaptive behaviors, those mental pathways we built in childhood, most of them were pretty genius, right? And so now what we want to do is we want to get reconnected with who we really are and build some new mental pathways. And this is one of the things that I love about language of listening, is what it does is it gives us the new thoughts to think. There are 4 premises in this model. Sandy, the founder, she was able to take play therapy, positive psychology, and transformational coaching and like just get it like down to 4 beliefs, 4 thoughts, 4 premises, we call them, and 3 tools, 3 simple tools. That's it. That's it. And so to get those thoughts in our brain, she gives us the tools to practice them in all our interactions with our kids. And it's that practice over and over and over again. As human beings, it starts to build the new mental pathways, and those ones will start to take over. So you have the connection of the belief with the simple tool that goes with it. And those new mental pathways get laid. Yeah.
Is that kind of what you mean when you talk about reparenting yourself? Because I did see you mention that.
Yeah. So the reparenting is reparenting yourself is a very specific thing that I do with, anybody that feels that they would like that. And it really is about building new mental pathways. And I'm happy to talk more about what those 2 specific areas are that I work with people in. That.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay. So one is, and this is a lot kind of what you're kind of almost talking about too, Brian, is just this idea of, or this is one of the ways that we can, retrain our brain. At any given moment, the human brain is taking in massive amounts of information, right? But there's almost like there's a filter in there, and it only lets certain pieces into the front. Now, when we're into the front, into our prefrontal cortex, right, the part that's reasons and our conscious brain, our conscious thinking. So, in childhood, there would have been certain things that, anybody that had difficult childhood, even anybody in a regular childhood, there's certain things that we bring to the forefront of our brain, especially to create safety. And, those things, they just continue on. So one of the things that we talk about in the reparenting and language of listening is, we know from language of listening that, or I've learned from language of listening that our preferences, our likes and our dislikes are what make up who we are. They make up our identity. Everybody has a unique mix. And that's a very simple way that we can get reconnected to who we are. That was a very necessary part of my own reparenting. The thing that happens is, though, and what happened, I'll talk about my life. My likes and dislikes got all shoved way down to the side. I had to really prioritize my parents' likes and dislikes to avoid abuse, to try to get on their side, to try to make sure that I was safe, right? And so then I call this recalibrating your radar system. My radar system was set to be really, really sensitive to other people's likes and dislikes, especially people in authority. That makes it really difficult for me to access my boundaries, because your boundaries are your likes and your dislikes, right? And then my boundaries are way down on the side. So that would mean that I would go around with my boundaries if I dared speak about them, if I was even aware of them. Is this okay with you? Is it okay with you that I don't like this, right? Like, is it okay for me to be who I am? Is basically what I'm asking, right? And so this recalibrating of the radar system, this resetting of this filter of what information it's sending to the forefront of your brain is one of the first pieces of work that I do with the moms that I work with, actually, is to get them really aware of what are your likes and dislikes. And throughout the day, how are you reacting to things? And notice, did you like it? Did you not like it? Those are your boundaries. That's getting reconnected to you. That's putting your boundaries, who you are at the forefront of your mind, instead of having to have this protection of having other people's boundaries as more important than your own. And then the other piece of reparenting that I do is I talk about this fountain that we should all have inside of us, of like, anytime we have that question, am I good enough? Do I have value and worth, right? We should be able to go inside and drink, have a good drink from this fountain of water inside of us. It's our parents' job to prime the pump of that fountain, right? So our parents got to pour a little bit of love in there in a very specific way to get that fountain going well. And if our parents haven't done that, if they weren't able to, because I believe all parents are doing the very best that they can do with what they have, right? And so what we can do is we can prime our own pump of value and worth, and we use the tools from language of listening to do that. But again, if we're walking around with an empty cup, if we can't get that thirst quenched, again, this is another way that we lose ourselves, because we have to go around other people saying, am I good enough? Can you give me, proof of my value and my worth? And so we walk around with this empty cup, and we will give up parts of ourselves because we need to know that we're okay. We need to know that we're worth the space that we take up in the world, right?
Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, so I was going to say how, it's interesting because with that sort of self-valuation, right? What is, like, I'm just going to use myself as an example. Like, I really have never cared what anyone thinks of me. Like, I just go, like,
Good for you, man.
I just value, I just do, I don't want to say I do what I want to do, because don't get me wrong. We all have this sort of approval process with sometimes people who care for us, right? But some people, I feel like I was always like this. Like, I don't know if it's something that I was taught as a kid not to care what other people think about you, or is it just me as a person, however I was developed, that is like that. So some of it, I guess my question is, does some of it even predispose to our biologies, like not to care or look for validation, or, we see our own self-worth, like almost from, birth or whatever. You get my point, from childhood.
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways that, kids are naturally born, with that self-belief, but it still does need to be reflected back to them. They still need that,
Well,
to happen.
and you know what? It's one thing, and I think about like my parents just tell me, like, it doesn't matter what other people think, right? But when the words and the behaviors don't align, right? Like, that's where there's a little bit of confusion too. So, so maybe in your case, your words and the and the behaviors were more aligned to kind of produce that. Because people say things, right? Everybody knows logically, like, it doesn't matter what people think, forget them, F them, but
Right.
it realistically, when there's a dynamic going on that tells me otherwise, that's when there's kind of a bit of confusion.
And I think too, and I guess I'm sort of taking a little off topic, because I'm also talking about other people, right? That's self, not
I
even.
told you he'd derail, right?
Yeah, like we're talking about parenting, which is, I guess, let's shoot, like, your whole job is to make sure your kids are healthy and safe, and you know what I mean? Like, I'm thinking it from all sort of reflective of what people, but I guess when you think of it from your parents, especially as a child, that's your whole world, right? That is your 100% world. There is no other, sort of mirror, I guess you could say, for you, right? In the context.
Right.
They're the most powerful one anyways.
Yeah.
They are the most powerful one. Yeah.
So now, you mentioned, you did briefly tell us about language of listening. Is there more that we should know about this? Because, like, what is it? How do people get involved in it? How did you stumble upon it? What's it all about?
Yeah. Well, I stumbled upon it because I was following, I think it's Rachel Macy Stafford is her name. She's the hands-free mama. And she's got she's got a book called The Hands-Free Mama, and she's got two girls. And the way that she spoke about her girls just really, I just thought, oh my gosh, like, I love the way that she talks about her girls. I want to know more about this, when I read her book. But then when I was following her on Facebook one day, that's how I found out about Sandy, because she had connected with Sandy as well, with the language of listening. So that's how I stumbled upon it. And because I was open, I was looking for it, right? I was looking for these tools. So that's how I stumbled on it. But I would just love to share, like, the three premises with the tools, just to kind of explain kind of how it works. And the really, really neat thing is that Sandy came up with this model, through the lens of parenting, because, her kids had a certain situation and she really wanted to be able to help them. So she went to get help with a play therapist, Dr. Gary Landreth. He's a world-renowned play therapist. And, she, again, so she came up with these things through the lens of parenting, but she was like, oh my gosh, this just works for everybody. These things work for everybody. So a big piece of the reparenting is actually using the tools on yourself. Again, just 3 simple tools. And even the beliefs can, you can focus them on yourself, but I'll talk about them in regards to children as I'm explaining it. So the first premise of language of listening says that everything children do and say is communication, and they must continue to communicate until they are heard. This is sometimes why we see behaviors over and over again from our kids. And we're like, why do you keep doing that? It's because there's a deeper communication going on in there about themselves or about a life challenge that they have. And so that behavior, they're literally acting out their life challenge. Like people say, like, oh, kids are acting up. Well, we say, they're literally acting out their challenge that, what's going on. And the challenge is always about growth. All this stuff is always about growth and meeting needs. That's the very basic piece of it. So the tool that goes with this understanding that everything children do and say is communication, the tool is called Say What You See. And we do this to connect with the child first. We always do it first. And we also do it so that we are in a place where we're truly understanding the child. We see things from their perspective. We can walk around in their perspective, almost like we can get to the point where like, oh, of course they hit their brother. Like where we really, doesn't mean we're okay with the fact that they hit their brother. Oh, now I get it, right? Like now I see what's going on. And so with the Say What You See, you just reflect back to the child anything you see them saying, doing, thinking, or feeling, without anything added, no judgments, no thoughts, no opinions. Sandy says in through the eyes and out through the mouth, skip the brain. Just reflect it back to the child. But again, you're trying to get yourself to a point where you're understanding. Another thing that you can do in that moment is just say, like, why would a great kid do that? Just assume that the kid's a great kid at all moments, no matter what they're doing, because all they're doing is trying to meet needs. That's all they're doing. That's all any of us are ever trying to do at any moment is we're trying to meet needs. I'll talk about the needs with the third tool a little bit more, but that's all they're trying to do. And so what our job is that we figure out what need the child is trying to meet using this tool, Say What You See. And then what we're going to do is if we don't like the behavior, we're going to outline what the boundaries are. Okay. And we're going to get on the kid's side to help them meet that need within our boundaries. That's our job. The boundaries is our job. Kids meet their own needs. The boundaries are our job. And so at this point, this stage is just connecting with the child, getting them to feel understood, but mostly it's so that we understand them. Okay. And then we can move on. So if the child is actually doing something you like, this is the way that we prime the pump. And we use this tool called strengths. This is the second tool, is the strengths tool. The premise that goes with the tool is that children have every possible inner strength and they act according to who they believe they are. Right. So just like the postman delivers a mail because he knows he's the postman, right? If your child believes that they're responsible, they're going to behave in responsible ways. If they believe they're loving, if they believe that they're a good sibling, they're going to behave in those ways, right? If they believe they're lazy, if they believe they're irresponsible, they're just going to behave in those ways. So the strengths tool is interesting because one of the things that we recommend to parents is that they don't use praise. Praise is all about the parent's opinion of the child. Good girl, good boy. I'm so proud of you. And many of us use praise for very good reasons, mostly because we probably didn't experience that stuff ourselves when we were kids, and we want our kids to have a good self-esteem. And so we're on the right track. But what we want to do is just shift it a tiny bit and use the strengths tool instead. And so the way the strengths tool.
Can I interrupt you 1 second? I have one question. So you mentioned how what the child believes. So let's just use lazy, for example. So if the child believes they're lazy, where are they getting that belief from? Is it from what's going on around them or from what they're hearing? Or is it just, did they see it?
Probably the way other people are responding to them. And again, the word lazy, any word is a learned word, right? If a child believes they're lazy, somebody probably called them lazy, I'm thinking.
Right. Yeah. So is this, okay. So is this, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm thinking like psychology 101 from college, right? Is this the same as like a secondary deviance where you keep telling someone there's something and they start becoming that? Or like if you're telling them they're lazy, is that part of it? Or is it just how they're defining themselves, right? Through the actions?
Yeah, it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, if that's what you mean. If you keep telling somebody they're lazy,
right.
And then that's, and that's the way Sandy described it to me one day. She's like, it works when you keep telling somebody they're lazy, then they just, right. So she's like, well, it must work the other way. If you tell them they're responsible, then, they're going to, but all you want to do is you want to just look for proof. Like if you really believe that you have an irresponsible child, look for proof. You can find the tiniest piece of proof that they're responsible, right? If our kid hangs up their jacket every time they come in the door, we're not going to notice. It just feels normal, but it's actually a really responsible thing to do. Right? And we'll start treating them more like a responsible person in many ways, not just telling them they're responsible, right? There's many ways we'll treat them as a responsible person, and they'll pick up on that. Just like you said, Nicolette, words can be spoken, but then there's that other stuff that we pick up on as human beings, right? The actions and the other, even the feeling that's in the air, like we kind of pick up on, those things, facial expressions, all that stuff. And so that idea of, what's the feeling behind the way that we respond to our kids. And sometimes we need to find the proof and see, oh, they hang up their jacket every time they come to the door. I never noticed, so start looking for those things. So the way the strengths tool works is you say what you see first, and that gives proof of what they did. So the first time I started using this tool, I'll tell a little story. First time I started using this tool, my youngest was 3. And I picked the strength helpful, and I was just going to practice looking for that one that day, and because frankly, I wanted more help around the house. And so I was sitting in the dining room and I said, hey, Emily, can you bring me a butter knife? And she walked in the kitchen and she grabbed a butter knife and she brought it back. So I did say what you see. You brought me a butter knife when I asked. Just that simple. You brought me a butter knife when I asked. And then I just added the strength. That shows you're helpful. That's it. Okay. I said it 2 more times. There's 2 more times that day I found the examples of her being helpful. So I did say what you see and the name, the strength. And she said, Mommy, you keep saying that. And I said, yeah, it's just something I'm noticing about you today. The 4th time that day, I noticed that she was helpful. She grabbed a chair in the kitchen, dragged it over to the sink. And she said, Mama, whenever you're feeling sick or tired, I'm going to help. And right now I'm going to wash the dishes. She was 3. She was 3 years old. To this day, she's 7 now. She still sees herself as a helpful person. She will jump up out of her chair and grab something for someone, usually before they even ask for it. And it brings her joy. It brings her joy to do that. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm hoping to get my son to pick up his own underwear.
Tell her how old he is. Come on.
Yeah, he's an adult child.
Yeah. You know what? Our brains are plastic. They can change. We can get those new mental pathways at any age.
Well, do you think that, and I know I don't want to interrupt you, but do you think that technology and devices are playing a role in some of this quote unquote laziness or unhelpfulness in a way? Because so for example, my son's watching his iPad and I tell him, hey, Michael, can you grab something? There's nothing going on here. There's nothing, and it takes like 7 times, Michael. And, I'm actually working with someone now to stop saying Michael, because that's not working. Right. So I shouldn't have to repeat myself all those times, but, and those boundaries. Right. But do you think that technology is kind of hindering a lot of what we're seeing in terms of like that, if parents are experiencing that laziness and that desire to not have, or video games, right? Video games are still a thing, right? Things like that.
Yeah, well, we know that those things can be addictive, and we know that they really catch all human beings' attention, right? There's a lot of parents that are on their phone and their kids are saying, Mom, 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 Mom,
right?
And Mom's not listening either. And we show them how to listen to family members, right? We're teaching them that. And we also show them what the boundaries are. So I would say that, again, those things can look like laziness or unhelpfulness, but the minute we put those labels on there, we're doing ourselves and our children a disservice. Our parenting becomes harder when we put those labels on there, right? It's our job to have the boundaries. It's our job. So if our child is not listening to us when they're watching when they're on the screens, we recognize it's difficult. We figure out, what need are they meeting? So for a lot of teens, for example, today, it's really meeting their needs for connection, especially during the pandemic. If they're not at school, it's like the best way, probably the way that feels best to them to connect with their friends. Right. So if your child is on there and they're meeting their need for connection, and that's the heaviest need that's presenting for them at that moment, you want to get where they are and walk around in their perspective and go, oh, of course they don't want to get off. This is the way they connect with their friends. How important is friendship in the teen years? And I still need them to come and do this thing, and so what can you do to help them meet their need? You can let them know that they can get right back on, or you can let them know when the next time is they can get on, or, there's lots of things you can do, but you want to let them know that you're on their side for getting that need met. so that they can feel like it's easy and predictable to get that need met. Because the hungrier we are to meet our needs, the less we are able to listen to other people, right? Sometimes the needs are, but if we've got support, to meet the needs, yeah.
It's interesting too, because you bring that up. Like my daughters, I have twin 7-year-olds, almost 8, and
Fun.
with them, like, yeah, they're even though they're that age, it's like Facebook Kids Messenger, so they're always talking to their friends or playing Roblox or whatever. And it's true, because like last night, my daughter's like, "Oh, I made a new friend. We're having so much fun on Roblox." I know it's a digital friend, but like, and she's like, I'm like, yeah, but it's time for bed. And I'm like, okay, 5 more minutes, you could talk to them tomorrow, make sure you friend them. And then she was like, okay with it, because she knew tomorrow. And it's interesting, like setting that boundary made her okay with first going, oh, I got to get off. I don't want to go to bed now. I was like, make sure you connect with her, make sure you do this, this, and this. And then she was fine. But I always try to keep that in context, especially recently, that they don't really have the connections they should have. Do you know what I mean? As kids, they're not, even though they're in school like here, but they don't have as many play dates as they used to. They don't, they're all their friends.
Winter, right? So winters are tough to begin with because you're not outside. You can't go to the
especially in the Northeast, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but go ahead, continue. There was more. I want to hear the rest.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So it's the next tool, which we kind of were touching on a little bit. And this is the one where we talk a little bit more about needs. And so the premise that goes with this third piece is that all behaviors are driven by 3 healthy needs: experience, connection, and power. And what children are doing is already meeting their needs. So we've talked about this a little bit. It's the child's responsibility to be meeting their needs. And the needs that we're talking about are needs for growth here, right? We are all always growing all the time. And so our kids are always growing, and we always need to be meeting these needs: again, experience, connection, and power. And the first part of that premise, I think, is really, really important, because it says all behaviors are driven by 3 healthy needs. It doesn't say that all behaviors are healthy, but it does say that they're driven by healthy needs, which means we can always trust the child's intentions. We can always trust their intentions, right? And I will stop here and just say it also means that we can always trust our own intentions. We're always just trying to meet needs. If you yell at your kids and you hate it, you're just trying to meet your need for power. And there's got to be a different way you can meet your need for power in that moment, in a way that you like. And that's what this is all about. It's about meeting needs in ways the parent and the child like, when we're talking about the parent-child relating. So when I talk about, ways that the parent likes, I'm saying within the parent's boundaries. Right. And when I'm talking about in the way the child likes, is that the child actually feels satisfying, right? That way of meeting the need actually feels satisfying. And so we call this, the tool that goes with this, can-dos. And we literally just invite the child into problem solving and say, must be something you can do to whatever. So what I'll do is I'll take all 3 tools and put them all together, okay, in an example, so that you can kind of see.
Can I ask you to define experience real quick?
Oh, yes,
you talk about the need of experience.
Let's talk about the needs.
What is that need?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that one, because it was showing up massively in my house when the lockdown first hit. Okay, and I was like, oh, they're just meeting their need for experience. Experience is, I've got this body. What can I do with it? I've got this life. Like what can I do, right? And so, and it's like experiencing being alive. So, my COVID example is, I started finding shampoo smeared all over the bathroom walls and toothpaste. And, I started finding my jewelry and bits and pieces all over the house. I'm like, what is going on? Kids need to explore their world. They need to learn. So like when you're seeing kids climbing on furniture, right? When you're seeing them experimenting with things like, making, like, the other thing they're doing is making weird concoctions in the bathroom. They'd like secretly grab like hair gel and like, all those things and like mixing it all together. It's just
my expensive shampoo and conditioner.
Right? Yes. Yeah. So their world became so small. And these were things they weren't getting into previously, but when they're stuck at home and they can't go out and play and they can't, we can't go to the library, we're not going to school, all those things, right? They needed to do something to understand their world and to learn and to experiment. And so that's just what they needed. It's just what they needed to do.
Okay.
And then
So you
power.
guys gotta come over here. We encourage that in this house.
Yeah, there you go.
You're not touching my expensive crap though. I'll tell you that much. I tell him, I just side note, I tell him, I'm like, Michael, that shampoo was $14. Can you play with the like $2 bottle of soap? And
that's you setting boundaries, right? You want them to experiment, so you got to be like, yo, you can only touch the $2 shampoo.
He asked me one day, he's like, how much was this shampoo? I'm like, too much, move on.
But you got it, Brian. That's the can do. That's what you can do, right? Like, I mean, sometimes that's the fastest thing. You walk into a room and the child's spilling water on the floor. Oh, you're spilling water on the floor. There's the say what you see. You can do that in the bathtub.
Yeah.
Right. And then they're happy dappy. They just go on their way and they go do it in the bathtub. You usually don't have a fight. It's when we're just telling them stop, 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 stop. Because we can't just stop meeting our needs. It's just not something we do as human beings. We don't just stop meeting our needs.
What
Right.
about when it's unsafe though? What if they're
Yes, well, that's an intervention. That's something different. And they're still meeting a need. And so you probably still want to try to help them meet their need, right? But
Right.
you might have to
safely?
walk in at that point. Yeah, here, I'll give my toddler example. Okay, imagine you're outside doing some gardening and you hear this sound behind you and you feel sick to your stomach because you know somebody's beating on the car. You're like, oh man, right? And you turn around and your 3-year-old's got this big stick and they're just like banging it on the car and you're like, oh crap, right? Obviously you're going to run over and you want them to stop right away, right? And so what I would do with a
Go
3-year-old,
to the neighbor's car. Go to the neighbor's car. No, I'm joking.
there's Brian's can do. If it's within your boundaries, Brian, right?
That's right.
So, but what you can do is you can just scoop up that 3-year-old. And when your brain is in the point of it, they're just meeting a need, when you know they're just meeting a need, your brain is
Right.
not stuck in this like, oh my gosh, they're destroying the car and they're going to be like a, because we start going into the future, like they're going to be this horrible person. They're going to be breaking everybody. They will run to the neighbor's house and start banging on the neighbor's car, whatever. Right?
You'd be like, Brian.
These fear, we get all this fear in our head. If we could just go, oh, they're just meeting a need. What can I do to help them meet this need? We can scoop them up and run them over to a tree and go, you want to bang that stick, like, here, try the tree. How's the tree? And then maybe they're banging on the tree and they're just like, no noise, and then you're like, well, I got one of those, metal swing sets in my yard. So you take them over to the metal swing set because you're okay with them banging on that. And you go, here, try this. And then they start banging the stick on the metal swing set and it's making a noise. And you're like, look, we can make different noises here and there. And then the kid's happy, and they're not banging on the car anymore. And you've helped them meet their need. And they can just keep moving forward. That whole idea of the can-dos is just to keep them moving forward. Yeah.
And then you move to a drum set and you move to.
That might be exactly what you do. Yeah. So the way that the tools work together is, again, you start with say what you see. And when you see behavior that you don't like, you're going to move into the can do's. So the say what you see is, again, helping you figure out what is it this child wants? What is the need that they're meeting? And you validate those things and you get inside their head, and then you support them to get that need met within your boundaries. Again, you want to find a way that both you and the child like. So sometimes it's picking them up and taking them over to the tree, right, to bang the stick on there. Sometimes it's just like, you hit your brother because you want to turn with the red car. Must be some way you can let him know that you want to turn without anybody getting hurt. Right. And then he can start thinking. And if the child can come up with something that's within your boundaries, great. Let them do that thing, right? Encourage them towards that thing. If they can't come up with something that's within your boundaries, that's when you start making can-do suggestions yourself, right? You can ask them, you can just let them know that you want to turn. You can tell mommy you want to turn and I can turn the timer on and you can get, a turn. Or maybe he's like to play with the blue car and you can trade him, all these different possibilities. And what we've done is we've helped the child problem solve, right? So next time this urge comes up, they have new mental pathways, Brian, new mental pathways. The pathways are forming so that they know what to do next time, right? Those of us that, sending kids on timeout or whatever, what we're doing is we're leaving them with a void, right? Punishment leaves a child with a void where they don't know what to do next time. They just have to stop, but they don't know what to do, right? When we sit with them, when we stay with them and help them know what to do the next time, right? And we support them, everything can change. And so once they come up with a solution, then we come back and add in the strength. So we bring say what you see back again. You traded your brother the blue car, so that he could have a turn with that. That's, you know how to get what you want without anybody getting hurt. Right? Or how to, there's so many things, there's so many strengths that could come in any one given situation, but that's how it works. Yeah.
That's it. Is there more? I'm like,
not really.
No.
And again, what's more is when the tools aren't working with the kids, we stop and we use the tools with ourselves. So if you feel like you're going to yell at your kids, or you did yell at your kids and you don't like it, get yourself to the bathroom, stand in front of the mirror and say what you see for you. Right. You're so frustrated right now. Like you literally talk to yourself in the second person, use the word you. You're so angry right now. You just want to scream your head off. You can't believe that they did that. Get yourself heard, figure out what you want, and then figure out how you can get what you want within your own boundaries with your can-dos.
I know we're talking about like emotional behavior here too, changing things, but here's the thing. We're also really teaching critical thinking, right? Or, which is almost more important, or even creative thinking. Like, what are the other ways to do this? Right. And actually that, besides obviously being good and healthy, mentally, but that's also teaching them other skills in their mind that don't make them so hardwired into one or two, pathways. It's giving them, it's letting them know there are options right out there and ways they could change their mind and change the pathways with critical thinking and creativity too, not just, in their emotional development or their future emotional development, but in other parts of their lives.
Exactly. Yeah, we talk a lot about possibilities in language of listening.
Mhm.
Possibilities. So when the possibilities are there, and you're free to choose, you're not stuck in that one pathway,
Yeah.
then you're free to choose the things that you like and the things that you love. Yeah.
So then what about these extremes? Because we talked about the extremes, I mean, I'm guilty of this. I spoiled this child rotten, right? And at the same time, I am also, guilty of always yelling, and it's like these two very conflicting things, right? And I think a lot of people, in an attempt to not do one thing, and not be that crazy angry parent all the time, they then go to that other side of the mailman's here, of the pendulum, and they end up kind of just giving in to everything, right? So how, I mean, and I guess this is kind of where the boundaries come in, right? So how do we stop those extremes?
It can be, the boundaries can be. Yeah. So I mean, a big piece of stopping the extremes is, of course, using the tools on yourself to figure out, like, you don't like the yelling,
Right.
and you want your kids to put their shoes on the first time you ask.
Mm.
So again, you want to get all your complaints out,
Mhm.
using Say What You See For You. Get all your complaints out, figure out what it is that you want, figure out even what it is that you wish for, because sometimes we don't even let ourselves think about wanting the things that we believe we can't have, right?
Mhm.
So sometimes we'll talk about wishes. This is when, and once we figure out the wishes, right, this is when you actually bring in the strengths for yourself. Figure out what hidden strength in you exists because of what you want, which is so interesting. What you want is connected to your likes and dislikes, which make up your identity. We talked about that, right? What you want is a beautiful reflection of who you are. And if you can find the hidden strengths in what you want, right? Like, what if it's just getting somewhere on time? You want your kid to put their shoes on the first time you ask, it's because I want to be on time. Look how responsible you are. You want to be, right? Like, build yourself up, right? Recognize your own strengths.
Mhm.
Once you know it's good, that what you want is a good thing, it's a positive thing, that empowers you to move into the can-dos. Like, must be some way that I can get them to get their shoes on the first time I ask without yelling at them. And the thing I really like to talk about when it comes to this Say What You See, and especially the Say What You See For You, so many times we can't actually solve the real problem. We can't get to the can-dos because we can't see the real problem. We think that we're the problem. We think that we're the problem. I'm such a bad mom. I'm yelling, like, and it's not okay that I want what I want, or I'm asking too much, or I'm terrible at this, right? All those things, we think we're the problem. And I always say people can't be problems. They can only have problems. So when we're stuck trying to solve the problem of us, people can't be problems. We're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. We can't get to the real one. So the Say What
Mhm.
You See For You gets you figuring out, I'm not the problem here. And same with the kid. When you do Say What You See with your child and you really get them seen and understood, they know they're not the problem. And they're ready. We become, as human beings, we become natural problem solvers when we know that we're not the problem. When we're seen and validated, we're just ready to grow. We're ready to solve the challenge, solve the problem.
I think that's really valuable, looking at the child as just trying to meet a need. I think that kind of gives me, if there's something that I've taken away from this conversation, I would say it's definitely that idea of, this is not something they're doing just because they're little assholes, like
Exactly.
he's actually got, something else that he wants fulfilled, right? I mean, but privately at night, I do call him a little asshole. So I mean, I will,
It's meeting
I
your
do,
need for power, Nicolette, right? It's meeting your
but,
need for
Well,
power.
oh,
Yeah.
but
So
yeah,
there's one other piece I'd like to speak to there, though, because you're
yeah,
talking about the pendulum, right?
yeah.
And so there's this idea of, and this was something that I was, guilty of too, where I was not really able to hold my boundaries with my kids. There's this idea of rescuing,
Mm.
right? And when we rescue our kids too much, that's also a difficult thing for them, that can cause, some struggles in their life. And so an example I'll give is, like, let's say your child comes up to you, because we've been talking about video games, right? Like, let's say your child wants, like, the new crazy video game system for Christmas. I'm so like not aware of what those things are right now. I used to be years ago, but anyways, we have like a Nintendo GameCube at our house. This is how
yeah.
old school we
Just
are
don't
around
say
here.
PS5. Don't say PS5 to them.
But let's say this is what they want for Christmas, and they're very adamant about it. And, for a parent that is not planning on getting it or doesn't not able to afford getting it, whatever, that kind of a thing, right? Like we try to stop the child from wanting the thing to prevent the child from having pain, and a little bit us too, right? Like, and this is what we do in our society though with disappointment, right? Is we just try to change the person's mind. You don't really want that, or whatever, and we just say no. If instead you move into can-dos with this child, right? Like you really want, this system for Christmas, and the budget's already all been spent. Must be something you can do to get what you want. Now imagine this is the possibilities coming up, Brian, right? This is critical thinking. Like you're giving this child this self-belief. There's got to be some way you can get that. Not going to come from me for Christmas, but there's got to be some way. What if that child decides they really want it, and that my mom believes I can get this thing, and they come up with this idea they're going to shovel the neighbor's driveway. They're going to go around to everybody in the neighborhood, and they're going to say, hey, can I shovel your driveway? And they end up earning the money to buy that game system. Like what? Like, isn't that amazing? Like just keeping them moving forward, encouraging them towards can-dos, even not in a situation where they're doing something you don't like. It's okay for them to ask for what they want for Christmas, right? Like, but just saying like, must be something you can do, even that. So, not getting to the point where we're trying to rescue them from frustration. Frustration has a lot of good to it. I mean, there's a motivation behind it. When we try to just take frustration away from our kids, or we're trying to shield them from really terrible things from happening, we have to follow our heart too. I always say the model is a marriage between the parent and the model, right? It's really a huge part of who we are, right? We bring our likes and dislikes, our boundaries into what's happening, and the way that, we like relating to our kids. This is why I call my business Love the Way You Parent, because it really has to be coming also from yourself. And my job, I feel, is really to teach the tools, to teach the possibilities, to get, especially moms, to a place where they feel free to choose in the moment, and when you're free to choose, you're always going to choose what you like and what you love. And this is how you get to a place where you love the way you parent.
Do you think, I mean, you're talking about like the PS5, but do you think a lot of parents rescue their kids from failure, right? Especially you see this with schoolwork, like the parents are doing the schoolwork. Like, I have so many friends where their kids got to a certain level and they're like, my kid can't do the schoolwork. Why can't they do the schoolwork? They did it. And it was like, no, you were doing the schoolwork. Like they don't want their kid to fail. So they put so much into it that they're really the ones doing it for their kids. Cause I mean, I don't believe there's really failure. It's really learning, right? Like failure is straight out learning. Like you're going to fail at stuff. You learn something, you move on, you do better the next time. Right. Do you think they're so afraid that their kids are going to fail that they rescue them from simple stuff that actually makes them, I don't know how to say this, but like resilient, right? It makes them more resilient to things, because we're all going to fail at stuff in our lives.
Yep. Yeah, well, again, there's handling disappointment, right? And so that handling disappointment is so important. And I think, I can speak to myself personally. There are times that I rescue my kids because I don't want them to experience the crappy stuff that I experienced in my childhood. And there's also times I rescue them because it's just way less work if I just do it myself. Right? Like it probably feels for a lot of parents, it's just way less work if I just do the schoolwork myself and I don't have to sit with them and try to teach them how to do it, because it can be very frustrating, right? Or I don't want to.
And I think there's also certain things that are just really stupid that they're forced to do. Honestly, I will say that, I mean, and maybe this is not what, the school wants to hear, right? But, there are things where I'm like, what, and Brian, I know you can attest to this. There are things where it's just like, I'm not even going to waste my time arguing with you, because I think that we can do something else with that time, like, let's just get this done, because me being your parent and also have living the years that I've lived, I know that you're not really going to need this at all in life ever, this is not important, so I kind of think that sense of rescuing, I'm okay with that. I am okay with that part.
Yeah, no,
well, and maybe that's not rescuing.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, sparing them from stupidity, right?
I'll tell you guys a funny story along that line. One of my children was in math extra help. And basically they were like, I'm like, but she could do math. Like, why is this one out of all of them? Like, she's really good at math. And like, well, she doesn't know how to do the math how we want her to do it. I'm like, but can she do the math? Because I could give her any math problem. Do you know what I mean? And she could do it. But no, she's not doing it the way. I'm like, I understand you want her to be taught, but if I'm teaching her, because this is, homeschooling right now, I'm going to teach her the way that I need to teach her. I mean, don't get me wrong. I was forced to teach her the other math, but she really didn't need it, the other way to do this math. But, she just, yeah. So I don't, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a hard time for everybody because the parents are, taking on this role of teacher and
Right.
yeah, Brian, you're going to teach it the way that you know how to teach it. And she knows it,
Yep.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes
And
sense.
it, and I think that rescuing is really important and something that I've we like to fix feelings, right? I grew up from a long line of feeling fixers. So, and when something breaks, we replace it immediately, right? And this is like, the generations, grandparents, great grandparents, this is what we do, right? So we would fix things. And then you have dad who is like, yeah, Nicolette, we're not going to fix this. We're going to let him sit with that feeling, right? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like we could just go replace it. Why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we just or divert it, right? Like, oh no, you can't do that. But tomorrow we're gonna have a big part, like, and he's like, why don't you just let him sit with that feeling, but and not always replace it with something immediately, right? So
Mhm.
it's a really I think when you talk about, finding a partner or what, I think that is a big part too, because you bring kind of like these other thoughts there. And for those who don't have that, then they can learn something from you or 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 language of listening, but that's really it's a new concept for me in the recent
Mhm.
years, because I didn't understand that that's what I was doing, so I think it's
Those were just the
important.
mental pathways you had,
Right.
right? Those were the
Yeah.
mental
Right.
pathways. And then we don't know what the other possibilities are.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't even feel like there's like for me, I didn't know that boundaries could be loving
Right.
and that a child could feel more connected to you after you held a boundary with them than
Can
before.
you
I
give
thought
me an
everybody was
example of a boundary that you have put up that actually enhanced that bond that you thought might have been unloving at one time? I'm
sure.
sorry, it's a
Yeah.
tough one.
No,
I'm
no.
just curious.
I'll tell you my hot dog bun story. I love sharing this one. But it just goes to show that like when we allow the child to have their feelings, they get to be who they are for one, right? Because their feelings are a message about their likes and dislikes.
Right.
Right. And so the child is, you would just go in there and be like, oh my gosh, this broke, like you're heartbroken, like you hate this, like, you just validate. And so like, I think to an adult, it's like, you feel like, well, aren't I just rubbing it in? Like, no, you're not, you're actually just validating that it's okay to feel that way.
Right.
And then they can become empowered. They can use those feelings to move forward, to problem solve. Right. So, but my story's, yeah, about
Hot
feeling
dog
more
bun.
connected after. So here's the story. It was a holiday weekend. My kids do not like the food that my husband and I eat, especially when they were younger. As Emily was probably about 4 or 5 when this happened. And so we made hot dogs for them for supper, and I was making a much nicer meal for my husband and I, and I heard a scream behind me, and I turned around, and Emily was ripping her food and throwing it all over the room because she hates a ripped hot dog bun. It's like the worst thing. And her hot dog bun had ripped, and she was livid. So my husband got after her, and she stood up and she just ran screaming out of the room. And I was like, oh boy. So knowing that she's someone that needs a little bit of space, my other daughter, you go right to her as soon as she's upset. This daughter, she just needs a little bit of space. She's like her mommy. I need a little bit of space to sort out my feelings. I knew she was hungry. I knew she'd come back, so I just waited. And when she came back in the room, I got down on her level and I was like, look, girl, I was like, I remember exactly what it was like to be a kid and have your hot dog bun rip. I was like, it doesn't taste the same at all. Of course it does, right? But I just like, getting into her perspective, doesn't taste the same at all. Like, you hate it when that happens. I said, and I brought up my boundary. I said, and the food is for your plate or for your tummy. It's not for the floor. And I said, if you go and pick up all your pieces of food and bring them to me on your plate, I'll get you a new plate with a new hot dog. And she did, no problem, because we connected first, right? I made it okay that she was upset, I made it okay that she was who she was. I made it okay that she hated her hot dog bun ripping. So she brought it over and I gave her hot dog number 2. And I said, look, I'm going to try my very best to make sure the bun rips, but I can't guarantee it. And I said, the food is still good, even if the bun rips. So I would like you to eat your hot dog, even if it rips. So she eats hot dog number 2 and she asked for hot dog number 3. So I gave her hot dog number 3 and she eats that. And when she was finished it, she said, Mama, this one didn't rip. I was like, why is she telling me this one didn't rip? And I said, Emily, did your second hot dog bun rip? And she said, yeah. And I said, now here's say what you see. Your hot dog bun ripped and you ate it anyways. And I said, that shows you have self-control, because she did not look like she had self-control the first time around, right? Right? I said, that shows you have self-control. Now, I didn't know what her reaction was going to be. I was just using the tools the way I was taught. That girl jumped up out of her chair and ran across the room and gave me the biggest hug. And I was like, what? Like, why is it important to a 5-year-old to know that she has self-control? But to this day, she still eats her hot dog. No problem. She's allowed to hate the fact that her hot dog bun rips. And mommy still tries really hard to make sure that bun doesn't rip. But darn it, all those buns rip sometimes. But she's empowered. She knows she has self-control. And so anytime that hot dog bun rips, she's got self-control. She knows what the boundaries are. Your kid's default mode is cooperative, by the way. That is their default mode. And if they're not being cooperative, there's something else going on, and we can uncover it. And it's a challenge that they're having a hard time getting a need met, and we can help them get that need met within our boundaries.
And I thought we were totally going into the square hot dog bun story. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
The square hot dog.
Oh my God. So you guys didn't grow up
Like
poor.
with the little
You get a piece
ends?
of- no,
Like
you get a piece of bread and your hot dog's in a piece of bread. Like you don't even have a hot dog bun. Like that's how we grew up.
Yes, yep.
Hot dog buns.
Yeah, I've eaten a few of those in my time. Yeah.
Well, Rose, we thank you so much. We would love if you could tell everybody where they can learn more about you and language listening, and how they can, potentially work with you, or whatever it is that you've got going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I share tons of information in my my Facebook group, simply called Love the Way You Parent. So if you go into Facebook and search Love the Way You Parent, you can like my business page by the same name if you like, but where I'm really active is the group. So that's where I recommend people go. You can also head to my website, afteraces.com. ACEs actually stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, because I do have that specialty in moms who had a difficult childhood. So afteraces.com. And you can find out about how to work with me by clicking on Love the Way You Parent at that website. You can find me on Instagram as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rose. We really, really appreciate your time. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, great. I'm glad. Thank you guys for having me.